India Flight 171 crashed into a building just moments after takeoff, killing 241 people on board, sparing a lone survivor.
After the catastrophic collision that occurred in India, many outraged passengers declared, "If we have to fly with Boeing, we'd rather not fly at all. We're waiting for the FAA to speak up." And then, after a long period of silence, the FAA has finally spoken. This agency has just released hundreds of pages of investigation documents revealing a series of serious violations involving Boeing. Many experts stated the FAA can no longer shield Boeing any further. So, what is the FAA's official ruling, and how will it strike Boeing? We will uncover each layer of the truth. After the devastating tragedy of Flight 171, all eyes immediately turned to the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, the only agency with the authority and technical data to deliver the final verdict. And then, after a prolonged silence, the FAA officially broke its silence. But what Boeing, the symbol of American aviation, did not anticipate was a counterblow from the very agency long considered its loyal rear guard for decades. Amid mounting pressure from major accidents, the FAA was finally forced to end its protective stance. No more defenses or comforting statements. The FAA quietly issued a dense report, hundreds of pages exposing technical violations, unstable manufacturing processes, and a fractured corporate culture, with a direct focus on the 787 Dreamliner. This report shocked the public because the Boeing 787 is not just an aircraft. It is the lifeline of countless international routes in the U.S., the operational backbone of airlines like United Airlines, American Airlines, and the spine of the global aviation network. Any negative information related to the Dreamliner immediately sends shockwaves through passengers, airlines, and investors alike. The FAA's technical investigation exposed a stunning detail. At Boeing's South Carolina plant, some employees skipped mandatory inspection steps but still falsely reported them as completed, posing a severe risk to flight safety immediately afterward. The FAA issued an emergency order requiring a full inspection of the electrical bonding and electromagnetic grounding between the wing and fuselage. And it didn't stop there. The FAA also confirmed that Boeing itself admitted to improperly installing nose section bolts on over 100 Dreamliner units still in storage, a systemic error. The consequence: since January 2021, Boeing lost its privilege to self-certify Dreamliner airworthiness. And from that point on, every 787 must receive direct FAA clearance before leaving the factory. But things are still not over. The FAA continued to strike by issuing an emergency airworthiness directive for 158 Boeing 787 Dreamliners currently operating in the United States. The reason was a technical defect considered extremely dangerous. The pilot's seat can automatically slide out of position during flight. Multiple flight crews reported that the seat unexpectedly dislodged from its lock when the aircraft changed altitude suddenly or encountered strong turbulence, causing the pilot to temporarily lose control of the flight instruments. They were forced to readjust their posture mid-air, severely distracting them from piloting the aircraft. Just imagine a scenario where the pilot is struggling to stay seated on a sliding chair while the plane encounters trouble. The consequences could be beyond devastating. This incident further damages Boeing's already battered image, because just prior to that, a special report commissioned by Congress painted a grim picture of the company's internal operations, irresponsibility, lack of transparency, and especially a collapse of the safety culture. Although Boeing made every effort to negotiate and plead for leniency, the FAA chief refused to budge. He declared bluntly, Boeing needs a fundamental cultural transformation where safety and quality are prioritized above all profit goals. Boeing is sliding deep into a crisis it has never faced before. Previously, following the door blowout incident on the Alaska Airlines flight, a series of in-depth audits led by the FAA exposed a string of serious violations in Boeing's production chain, including its key supplier, Spirit Aerosystems. Out of 89 required quality control checks, the faulty aircraft failed up to 33, from improper parts storage, oversimplified assembly processes, to a lack of oversight in critical stages. All were described as signs of a production line out of control. And the most alarming aspect, as the FAA emphasized, was the excessive self-monitoring authority granted to Boeing, a distorted system where technical staff, who should have been focused solely on manufacturing, were instead assigned to represent the FAA in assessing safety, only to silently ignore critical technical warnings. That very mechanism suffocated every voice of caution from the moment it appeared. And the price to pay? Not just hundreds of lives, but the global reputation of an American aviation giant. The story of John Barnett, former quality engineer at Boeing, is a stark example. He once exposed dangerous flaws in the Dreamliner series, metallic fragments suspended in the electrical systems, and inspection procedures bypassed through loopholes. Barnett filed reports, raised concerns, submitted complaints, but was ignored. And right at the moment he was preparing to testify in a lawsuit against Boeing, he was found dead in a hotel room, ruled as suicide. But the public didn't believe it, because the timing of his death was too precise, too suspicious. After the mid-air door blowout on the Alaska Airlines flight, public opinion has come to a near unanimous conclusion. Boeing has gone too far, to the point that even the FAA, its longtime shield, can no longer offer protection. Whatever the reason, the relationship between Boeing and the FAA is breaking apart. And after the Dreamliner disaster in Ahmedabad that killed 260 people, the FAA has changed its tone, harsher, colder, and more distant than ever. So what exactly is happening inside the FAA? Could it be that they are the ones turning their backs on Boeing? According to many policy experts, pressure from the federal government and the United States Congress has pushed the FAA into a position where silence is no longer an option. Live footage of plane accidents, growing public outrage, and relentless media inquiries have made siding with Boeing no different from setting themselves on fire in front of the public. If the FAA keeps covering up, they will be seen as accomplices. A former investigator from the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, told NBC News. But not everyone shares that view. Many observers believe that the FAA is not betraying Boeing, but rather trying to save it through a shock remedy, cut to survive, by intensifying inspections, publicly criticizing corporate culture, and demanding structural reforms. The FAA is trying to regain public trust before Boeing collapses completely. In other words, if left alone, Boeing will sink with no escape. But if exposed, held accountable, and restructured, it may still have a path forward. The FAA is choosing to sacrifice a long-held privileged relationship in order to protect something more vital: public trust and the authority of independent oversight. If the FAA loses credibility, the entire U.S. civil aviation system will come under suspicion. And no one wants that to happen, an aviation expert warned. However, what surprised many people, even evoked laughter, was the way the FAA once tried hard to support Boeing over the years. For a long time, Boeing and the FAA were seen as an inseparable duo. On one side, the largest aircraft manufacturer in the United States and a symbol of national industry. On the other, a regulatory agency supposedly independent, but often accused of being overly lenient with Boeing. To understand this better, we need to revisit the deeply entangled relationship between Boeing and the FAA over the decades. As everyone knows, Boeing is not just a company, it is part of America's national identity. And because Boeing carries the stars and stripes, any excessive regulatory intervention was often seen as a blow to national prestige. Boeing has long been viewed as the favorite child of the federal government, continuously receiving subsidies and billion-dollar defense contracts. The closeness between Boeing, the government, and the FAA became so tight that the media repeatedly questioned whether a system of institutional favoritism was in place. According to multiple investigative reports from the Project on Government Oversight, POGO, The FAA allowed Boeing engineers to participate in safety certification processes, a model described as the fox guarding the henhouse. In other words, Boeing was both the manufacturer and the evaluator of its own products, with no higher-level independent oversight. Reuters and Pogo both noted in their investigative documents, FAA's rules for certifying plane safety effectively give the aviation industry the power to regulate itself, a situation bordering on legalized corruption. The inevitable result is that manufacturing flaws could be hidden, ignored, or handled superficially, raising flight safety risks to alarming levels. Previously, the U.S. House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure released a 239-page report harshly criticizing both Boeing and the FAA for a troubling pattern of repeated and serious failures. The report came after two deadly crashes involving the Boeing 737 MAX in 2018 and 2019, which claimed the lives of 346 passengers. The document stated clearly, the accidents were caused by a deadly combination of poor technical assumptions by Boeing engineers, a lack of transparency in Boeing's leadership, and insufficient oversight by the FAA. However, contrary to public expectations, the FAA's management rejected the conclusions of their own technical experts and did so at Boeing's request. In fact, several FAA employees admitted they knew the leadership was more concerned with helping Boeing achieve its business goals than protecting passenger safety. More concerning, there have been instances where Boeing employees, in their role as authorized representatives of the FAA, deliberately failed to report serious technical flaws. This not only helped Boeing avoid a large-scale grounding, but also temporarily saved the company from a wave of lawsuits that could cost tens of billions of dollars. According to legal experts, if the FAA were to officially acknowledge critical flaws in the certification process, every delivery contract and liability insurance policy could turn Boeing into a ticking time bomb that might explode at any moment. But the root cause is not legal. Enormous pressure from the race against Airbus, the rising European rival, has driven Boeing into a frenzy of cost-cutting, production acceleration, and desperate market retention. Many investigators have previously condemned both Boeing and the FAA for ignoring warnings from internal technical staff in order to prioritize deadlines. Even after major failures like fuselage cracks, Dreamliner battery malfunctions, and the two deadly 737 MAX crashes, the FAA responded only with localized suspensions and mild advisories, without issuing truly proportionate penalties. But this time, the landscape has completely shifted. The FAA can no longer continue shielding Boeing because every boundary has been crossed. And when the FAA is finally forced to act, not out of hatred for Boeing, but because it can no longer protect a crumbling empire from within, the world turns its attention to one bigger question: how will the public respond to this verdict? Public reaction to the FAA's recent verdict following the Boeing 787 crash in India is deeply divided. Many initially praised the FAA, believing that the agency was finally taking a tougher stance and beginning a full review of Boeing's manufacturing and certification processes. International media also regarded this as a notable turning point, especially after years of criticism toward the FAA for being too lenient with Boeing. Several veteran aviation experts called it a necessary wake-up call, a sign that the era of indulgence is over. However, not everyone was convinced. A portion of the public, especially independent technical experts and investigative journalists, expressed skepticism. They argued that the entire effort was nothing more than a staged performance to ease public pressure, while the inspections themselves had already been pre-announced to Boeing. Some even mocked the process by saying, "This isn't an investigation, it's an exam with the answers provided." An anonymous source who once worked inside the FAA revealed, "Boeing always knows when the FAA is coming, and they prep the line in advance so everything looks natural." These accusations have sparked a larger question. Is the FAA truly reclaiming its role as an independent regulator, or is it merely trying to patch up its image after nearly losing public trust completely? Because if the FAA only intends to issue formal reminders without digging into the root of the problem, then another disaster is only a matter of time. That does not mean everything is settling down, because right after this controversial verdict, Boeing has once again plunged deeper into crisis. On the stock market, Boeing shares are plummeting. Investors have run out of patience with repeated statements like "safety is our top priority" or meaningless promises to make things right. One analyst bluntly warned, "This is no longer a technical issue. This is a crisis of trust, and Boeing is approaching a breaking point that cannot be reversed without fundamental change." International airlines have also begun taking clearer actions. Many are requesting detailed clarification on the technical integrity of the Dreamliners currently in service. Some carriers have temporarily paused their plans to receive new aircraft. Others have quietly shifted toward the Airbus A350, seen as a safer and less scandal-prone alternative. Phrases like "cracked Dreamliner" or "reversed bolts" are no longer just technical issues. They have become fears that stop customers from booking flights. With trust collapsing, finances unraveling, and a wavering network of clients, Boeing is no longer facing a typical scandal. This is a fight for survival, where its core values, reputation, market share, and even its reason to exist are under threat. Can Boeing emerge from this seismic crisis? That question, as of now, remains unanswered.